Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're digging into a really powerful, and let's be honest, pretty controversial perspective on one of the world's most well-known intelligence agencies. We're going to be looking at the CIA through the eyes of Noam Chomsky. And let me tell you, it's a very different story.
So let's just jump right in with the big question that really frames this whole explainer. Is the CIA, at its core, a protector of freedom? Or is it something else, an enforcer of a specific kind of power?
All right, before we can really get into the critique, we've got to understand the official story, right? The mission that we all hear about for the CIA is actually pretty straightforward. It's all about protecting national security.
So the official role, well, it's pretty much what you'd expect, isn't it? Gathering intelligence on potential threats, protecting democratic ideals, and basically acting as America's first line of defense. This is the story most of us are familiar with. But it is definitely not the only one out there.
And then you have Noam Chomsky, who comes in with a completely different take. He's called the agency, and I'm quoting here, a privatized terror agency. Wow, I mean, that's a huge claim, right? It's a massive departure from the official mission. So what's the logic behind a statement like that?
Okay, so for Chomsky, this whole critique really boils down to one central idea, that the CIA isn't primarily a defense agency at all, but instead it's an instrument for maintaining and expanding U.S. global dominance, or what's often called hegemony. So if you look at it from his perspective, the real goal isn't just security. It's about making sure the entire world is set up in a way that benefits U.S. state and corporate interests. The CIA, in this view, is the tool that makes sure other countries, well, that they fall in line.
All right, so if the CIA is the enforcer in this model, what's in its toolkit? How is this global power actually maintained on the ground? Well, Chomsky's analysis points to two main methods.
First up, you've got the direct, hands-on stuff, covert action and subversion. And then there's the second tool, which is a bit softer, but in his view, just as powerful, propaganda. This is all about shaping how people think, what he famously calls manufacturing consent. Let's dig into both of those.
When it comes to covert action, Chomsky points to a pretty long track record. I mean, this slide just shows a few of the big examples everyone talks about. You've got Iran, Guatemala, Chile. In each of these cases, you had democratically elected leaders who were overthrown right after they started policies, like nationalizing their oil or redistributing land, things that directly challenged U.S. corporate interests. The argument here is pretty clear. These actions weren't about stopping a military threat. They were about stopping economic independence.
Okay, so that's the direct action part. Now, what about that second tool? Well, beyond the coups and the subversion, Chomsky argues the CIA was involved in this massive campaign to shape hearts and minds on a global scale. And look, we're not just talking about dropping leaflets from a plane. This was way more sophisticated. We're talking about secretly funding intellectuals, paying for academic journals, even sponsoring cultural festivals, all to promote a worldview that was friendly to U.S. policy.
And the scale of this was just huge. I mean, we're not talking about a couple of small projects here and there. The agency itself reported that it was involved in over 1,000 books in just its first 20 years. 1,000! The whole idea was to steer the global conversation, to make U.S. dominance feel, normal, natural, even benevolent.
And this is a really crucial point. Even the most basic function of the CIA, gathering intelligence, isn't seen as neutral in this critique. Chomsky argues that the analysis itself often gets twisted to justify a policy that's already been decided on. He'd point to something like the justification for the 2003 Iraq War as a perfect modern example of this, where the intelligence was shaped to fit the policy, not the other way around.
Okay, so we've talked about the how. We've seen the tools in the toolkit. But what about the why? What's the grand strategy that ties all of this together? To explain this, Chomsky uses this really powerful and, pretty provocative metaphor.
He calls it the mafia principle. Yeah, you heard that right. In this analogy, the U.S. is like the Godfather, the Don. Now, the Don doesn't have to control every single thing that happens on his turf, but what he absolutely cannot stand is disobedience. So if some small shopkeeper, or in this case, a small nation, steps out of line, they have to be made an example of. Why? To make sure nobody else gets any bright ideas.
And this table here, it really breaks down the roles perfectly. You've got the U.S. state as the Don, the one setting the rules for the whole global system. Then you've got the enforcer, which is the CIA. Their job? Punish anyone who defies the Don and keep order. And everyone else, the other nations, they're the clients. And they learned pretty quickly that staying compliant is the safest way to go. So in this view, the biggest threat isn't another country becoming a rival power. No, the real threat is just successful independence.
So,
When you put it all together, what you've got are two stories about the very same organization that just could not be more different. On one side, a protector of freedom, and on the other, an instrument of empire.
So let's really put these two narratives side by side. The official story says the CIA protects democracy. Chomsky's critique argues it as a history of subverting it. The official line is that it ensures security. The critique, that its actions often create what's known as blowback, unintended consequences that actually lead to more instability down the road. And finally, think about this. Whenever there's a scandal, the agency is often painted as a rogue elephant, something that's gone out of control. Chomsky just flat out rejects that idea. He argues it's not rogue at all. It's a highly disciplined, highly effective instrument of state power, doing exactly what it's designed to do.
And all of this really leaves us with one big, crucial question to think about. In this battle between two completely different stories of power, whose version ends up being written down as history? You see, understanding this whole debate isn't just some academic exercise about the past. It's really about how we see global power and the role of intelligence in our world right now. Thanks so much for tuning in.